See here, a male voice said, sounding dignified but quite offended. She crawled out and looked around but saw no one. Who's there? She called. In here, girl, the voice said again. She peeked back into the dryer where her sock was, standing up on its own somehow.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Edmonds, the editor-in-chief of For Page and Screen magazine. I'm here today with Raine Fielder, author of Socks, which we had the pleasure of publishing in our eighth issue. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. Um, so I'm so excited to talk about this story as someone who notoriously has mismatched socks all the time. I love this story, both for the literal and the kind of more thematic things that it deals with. So I would love to just start off with the story itself. If you could tell me a little bit about what inspired it, kind of what led you to this story.
You know, I saw a picture on the internet of a pair of socks with a mustache and a monocle, and for some reason, it made me think of like, what would socks say to us if they could talk, and that's one of the main things that socks do is go missing. So, um, I don't know. It all just came about. I'm kind of a writer where sometimes I'm hard to explain where inspiration comes from. It just kind of hits you, and you just kind of go with it, and
Mhm.
so it kind of went from there. But it definitely started with just a picture of a sock with like a handlebar mustache and a monocle.
The socks sound adorable.
Yeah, yeah,
But yeah, no, I completely understand that. I once read a story because I misread something that was written in French as lesbians, and it was a whole thing. So the little tiny
right,
bits of inspiration can take us lots of places. Um,
right.
yeah, but the story is so fun and it's fun on the surface, but it also deals with a lot of more emotional beats as well. We have kind of the theme of independence and this kind of idea of what we should want for ourselves, what the Sox should want for themselves versus what they actually want. I'm curious, kind of if those are themes that you work in a lot, if those are themes that just spoke to you for the story, if you could talk a little bit about those themes, some.
Yeah, I definitely find myself gravitating more towards like people who are outsiders or people who have been through traumas or just even people who go through daily like hardships, that are not that, you know, they don't seem that big to everyone else, but to who's suffering with them, it's like
Hmm.
that's their world.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think you capture that really well because it is a very mundane setting. It's a very mundane occurrence in the mismatched sock part, not so much the speaking sock part, which I love.
Yeah.
Um, but that kind of, this is something that so many people have experienced, and these are feelings and kind of this idea of mismatchedness, this displacement that so many people have felt. It pairs really, really wonderfully, those themes, the setting, the setup of the story. One of the reasons I think it works so well. Um, when you talked about your inspiration for the talking socks, but I'm curious when it comes to genre, because I know you write many other things as well, and we'll talk about those a little bit later. Um,
Mhm.
where do you feel like your writing usually falls genre-wise? Do you like playing with these kind of like slight little fantastical elements, or do you feel like this was a departure for you?
I've had several instances of writing some fantasy, but I like fantasy that is closer to it's more grounded in realism.
Hmm.
For my writing, I'm not sure why that is, but something about it just you know that it's on the edge of this might be able to happen.
Hmm.
Um, I really like that that level of sci-fi or fantasy that's it's not real, but it's very close to what maybe could be real.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. No, I love that. And I feel like we definitely see that in this story. There's that kind of moment reading the story, I feel like you get the question of, oh, are the socks, is Pierre actually speaking to us, to the main character, or is this kind of the main character reconciling with herself and like her own way of thinking? There's that question mark when it comes to the fantasy in this story of, is it truly fantastical? Or is this just kind of playing out in her head as she's kind of like daydreaming at the laundromat, for lack of a better word?
Right.
Um,
Right.
And I love that subtlety. I love that subtlety so much because you can play around with it, and the ambiguity gives so much room for interpretation and to kind of explore all of the different themes and meanings behind the story. Um, so yeah, I absolutely love that. Um, I'm curious, what kind of draws you to that fantasy element in general? I want to talk a little bit, we can kind of lead into this now. I want to talk a little bit about your origin as a writer. In general, did you start out writing fantasy or fantasy adjacent stories? How did you get your start?
Um, Actually, I started writing poetry when I was probably about 10 or 11.
Hmm.
Um, which I that's that's where I started thinking about being a writer. But before that, I wrote a story that was assigned, in grade school that my teacher, called attention to, called my mom, and was like, I think she really might be into this. And so that was a little kind of like a coping mechanism because my aunt had died, which she had died before I was born. And, I had listened to this song by Garth Brooks, and like, I just pictured this story coming to life of like, what would this be like if it was an actual story instead of just a song, and like, and so I wrote that for class. And you know that was kind of, I don't know, it's just kind of always been a part of what I how I deal with things, and so
Hmm. Hmm.
it kind of evolved into like, um I don't really choose what genre a story is going to be until I'm in the story, and so it kind of, I just follow the story.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense. No, do you still write poetry today? Still?
Oh yeah, yeah. I write
Mhm.
poetry a lot of times. I wouldn't say every day, but there are, like I there's a vocal.com which I go on, and they have challenges like write a poem about this or that, and it just kind of keeps that side of my writing uh going, the wheels turning, prompts for
Hmm.
poetry.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I completely get that. I did something similar once. I do not keep up with it now, so I have all the props for you. I cannot keep up poetry that much. Um, but there was definitely a point in time where I was kind of writing poetry much more consistently. Kind of like you said, just to kind of keep it going, to keep experimenting, to keep pushing. Do you feel like your poetry and this kind of consistent poetry work that you're doing helps to inform your fiction writing at all?
Yeah, actually, one thing that has happened is one of my characters in my book series is a songwriter and a singer, and so like it has helped me to write her songs, since I write songs outside of, fiction. Um, so it's a lot. I feel like it makes it a little bit easier to get in her headspace and write her songs for her that way.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, that's fantastic. I could never write a song. I have so much respect for people who write music.
Oh,
Um, it's
thank you.
it's yeah, it's such a different beast in that.
Hmm.
Um, I would love to hear about your process with that, just my own personal curiosity. What's your process like with that?
Um, Usually it's just something, I don't know, I just hear a rhythm in my head, and sometimes I will sing them into like a recording. But really, my love of music started from my uncle Mark. He was like the biggest music lover, and I don't know, it just feels like it's always been a part of my life. Um, and it's something that I just feel like I I really like listening to songs that have a story to them, and I think that's kind of, I don't know if it's the chicken or the egg, if I like those kind of songs because I'm a writer, or the other way around, but I really gravitated towards songs with like a story, and that's kind of how I like to do, or go off of like dealing with my own emotions, getting them out on paper.
No, absolutely. I love this kind of theme that you seem to have. I know I'm talking about your life and your processes. That might sound weird to say. But I
That's
love the
okay.
way you're talking about this and how everything is kind of interwoven and interconnected. The poetry, the songwriting, the storytelling, all of that. Um, it sounds like it's
Hmm.
all building off of each other in a really fascinating and really impactful way.
Oh,
Um,
thank you.
yeah, yeah. And I do want to talk about your series. Is that the Invictus series that you mentioned?
Yes, I just finished the first draft of the fourth and final book of that
Con
series.
Congrats. That's fantastic. Oh my
Oh,
gosh.
thank you.
Yeah, yeah. So tell us a little bit about what it's about. Songwriting is an element, but what else about it?
Well, it starts out in the first book about these three girls who have grown up together, and one of the characters, her dad has passed away. He passed away when she was 3, and she doesn't know exactly how that happened. He worked at a local plant, and when she's a teenager, she wants to investigate, and they end up getting like involved in an explosion at the plant where it doesn't harm them, and they're like, why aren't we harmed? So they end up having like superpowers, and then they meet another girl at college who is uh, you know and so it becomes a four of them, and each book is about one of the four, and with the last one being the girl that it was her dad that passed, and her she ended up getting the superpower of her singing voice puts people in a trance. So
Okay.
oh yeah, and so it's been, but it is about girls with superpowers, but the way I tend to write it is that there's a lot more to do with their like personal emotional journeys and things like that.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I love the kind of framing of each book in this series being about a different one of the girls. I mean, I have not read them, but it sounds like a very effective way to get to dig into that emotional kind of arc, the connection, all of that by focusing on each individual rather than perhaps just a main character and all of the tangential happenings throughout the series. Um, I love that framing. I feel like I'm just gushing, but it sounds really
Oh,
cool.
oh, thank you.
Yeah, yeah, of course, of course. Um, and when it comes to kind of the emotional arcs, I mean, college, going into college, loss, all of that, new friendships is very much, again, we have that universal experience, that kind of thing that we talked about with socks. Um, but in that, it's much, sounds like it would be more of like a coming of age, coming into power journey there. I'm curious about kind of what inspired that or what you like most about exploring that kind of arc, that kind of journey.
Um, yeah, I really like delving into like, I mean, getting into the minds of the characters, and just really feeling, things that I haven't personally experienced, but or things that I have, or there's a lot about this series that's been really cathartic for me. losing parents and things like that. And it was really, I could really put a lot of, things in there that I had experienced, but not not have it be exactly the same as mine, and get to have some sort of
Mhm.
empathy for people that have experienced things that are similar but different to what I have experienced. And finishing the series is so bittersweet because I feel like I know the girls personally, and it's kind of sad to say goodbye to them.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. I personally have not written a series of things I could not imagine because we get so invested in what we write. Like as writers, everyone puts a little bit of themselves into their writing and gets so invested in their characters and their journeys. Having that journey for so long with the same characters has to be very, very kind of emotional in all regards. Um,
Right.
yeah, absolutely. Now, I'm curious if that being such a long and extended process, what was it like from kind of the craft side of it? How much planning did you put into, okay, we're at the start, let's think about it 4 books down, or did you kind of work it out as you went along since it was a much longer process than kind of short story writing and short fiction writing?
The overall arc of it, the spine of the plot, I had it figured out by
Mhm,
the first book, but um, each individual's like, what is she going through in her book? That came when I started each individual book. But I definitely tried to plan a lot because with a series, you can't go back and change things once you put out a book. So
mhm,
you kind
mhm,
of have to reread each. There was a lot of rereading each book as I started a new one because it's like, what threads have I left open, things like that. And there was a lot of outlining, and by the end of it, I had a bunch of. It became much more planned out than it was when I started, because the first book of the series was actually the second book I ever um, put out.
mhm, mhm. Interesting. Yeah, I always wonder, or I guess not wonder, wonder is the wrong word here. I've always kind of thought it was interesting because the books can change going through the editing process, not just through the draft process as you're writing, but once it kind of goes out there, is published, books can change in that kind of more formal editing process. And I feel like having to remember those changes, what is in the published version versus what was maybe in like the draft as you conceived it, and then remembering that, carrying it through, I feel like would add a layer of complexity there, especially if they're being released as you're still writing the later books. Mhm.
Right. Yeah. It's um. Well, I self-published them, so
I mean,
I
still,
kind of did.
still, there's time.
Yeah. Yeah. Um. Well. Um. Yeah. I just tried to read the final copies of them before I started. The next one. And
Mhm.
but it was definitely, hard to manage. I kept a list of everything that I might need to remember, like characters' names and eye colors and what car they drove and things like that.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, no, those little details can kind of get past you. I remember I was editing something, and this was not published. This was not part of a series. I had written a book and then put it down and then looked at it again. And I'm like, oh, she has tattoos? Since when?
Right, right.
Like, oh, okay. But yeah, no, lots of little details. It's a lot to keep organized. Um,
Hmm.
If you don't mind, I would also love to talk about the self-publishing process because I know a little bit about it. I have some friends who self-publish. I don't have a full-length book out in any form at the moment, so I have no personal frame of reference. Um, but there are so many details and moving parts and so much work that goes into it. So I would just love to hear about your experience with that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, totally. You know, the first time I did it, I researched a lot before I decided to go with that route because, you know, it's a long journey to get
Hmm.
traditionally published, and I definitely wasn't gonna, you know, um, I was trying not to get scammed by emails, different things,
There's so many out there. It's terrible.
right?
Yeah.
And I tried to do as much research as possible. And actually, when I first self-published, it was a totally different website. It was called I can't remember what it was called, but it was the Amazon version of self-publishing, and
Mm-hmm.
they transferred it over to KDP. But yeah, it was really daunting the first time, and there was this painting I really wanted to use for a cover, and it was online, and I contacted the people that painted it. It was a couple, a man and wife, and they had painted it together. And I tried to get in contact with them for permission or to find out how to do that, and they never did respond. So I'm like, I can't, I can't use it. So
Hmm.
that was, there's disappointments and things like that. But um, yeah, it was a long journey learning how to, you know, format things, and it's a lot of work that people don't. I don't. If you haven't done it, it seems daunting, and it kind of is. But once you get a pattern down, I guess, once you do it a couple times, it kind of becomes like, okay, and now I'll go to this step, and it kind of becomes like a pattern. So it's not as bad, but there's still frustrations. You always want to get the perfect font for your cover and things like that. And now I
Hmm.
can't, you know, I would love to be traditionally published, but at the same time, I can't imagine giving up. Um, like I have total control of everything, and
Hmm. Hmm.
it would be kind of hard to give up some of that. Have somebody else deciding like the color of the wording on the front and things like that. I mean, I'm sure there would be collaboration, but
Hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And especially now that you kind of have that experience, you have the skills to kind of
mm-hmm.
handle all of that yourself, it kind of becomes a question of, is it really necessary to go the traditional route? I mean, you're obviously a, skilled at it, thriving with it, so it's kind of like, I don't know that it would be worth it to give up that control at that point. I mean, obviously, you're
Right,
making your choice, but um, yeah, no, once you have those skills, those are really invaluable and really, really helpful to kind of deciding what path you want to go down later on.
right. Yeah, I definitely prefer independent, doing it independently. Um, there's tough things like marketing and things like that, but
Mhm.
once you get all those things, it's yeah, I would probably rather be independent.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, no, I completely understand that. I have admittedly considered independently publishing and self-publishing before for some things. I have that
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I just don't think I don't want to say they're not queryable, but I'm like, do I want to go through like they mean too much to me. And I'm like, do I want to go through that back and forth with them? Um, so I understand. I'm like, I don't know if I would want to put that in someone else's hands, honestly.
Right.
Mhm, mhm. No, absolutely, absolutely. Now you had mentioned to backtrack a tiny bit, that the first book of the series is the second book that you had put out. I'm curious if you could tell me a little bit about the first book you ever published, because I actually don't think I have that one written down in my little list of notes.
Oh, it was called Better Off. It's still available on Amazon. Um, I actually started writing it when I was 17 in a journal, like by hand.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. And there was like 70 some pages written by hand. And I just, life happened, and I got away
Mhm.
from it for a while, and I hadn't written anything for a long time. And I found the journal and I was like, you know what? I had started writing at this point, but nothing as long as like a book. And I found that and I was like, before I write anything else, I should finish this. And so I like updated it because it was pretty bad because I was a 17-year-old. um,
Mhm.
and now looking back, it's even, I'm like a little bit like, oh, that's still a little embarrassing. But at the same time, I think it's a good sign that I look back on it like that because that means I'm growing as a writer. So I'm like, well, at least, if I felt the same about something I started when I was 17, I probably wouldn't be growing. So that's
Mhm.
one way to look at it.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. Um, yeah, yeah, that's fantastic advice too, just in general. Like if you cringe at your past work, that means you've grown.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. Now, in contrast to that, I feel like I'm just kind of hopping around here, but why not? In contrast
hmm
to that, you just finished another book. Yes, you just had a new book come out. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Skin Deep. Yes,
Hmm.
I put that out last fall. I'm pretty sure it was. And that one was unexpected because I got this idea of like, what if tattoos came to life? And it was going to be a very small, like,
Ooh, love that.
horror story, like Goosebumps style.
Hmm. Hmm.
But nothing was coming to me about it. I mean, I had the premise, but that was it. And then all at once, I just heard this name in my head that I had heard previously, Arabella.
Hmm.
And, I was trying to go to sleep. And then this entire, like, I had been researching pirates for fun. But
Amazing.
yeah, and all these like ideas started coming to me about this character Arabella, and like, so I came up with the dual timeline of like, there's a modern girl named Kia,
Mhm.
and then like the next chapter is like journal entries from the 1700s, and so it just switches back and forth between timelines of like, and they kind of like converge eventually, and you know,
Mhm.
for some reason that name just opened up an entire world of like um, the 1700s timeline, and so I was like, oh, this is what this story is supposed to be, and it became a lot deeper and kind of darker.
Ooh, love that.
hmm
Mhm. I love that. That sounds fascinating. Everything you're saying, I'm like, I need to go read this book. I'm like, I love tattoo culture, historical fiction, amazing, like dark, creepy, perfect. I need to read this
Thank,
book now.
thank you.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Now with the kind of dual timelines, do you often write in like non-linear form? Was it a challenge? Was it not?
Um, well, yeah, actually, the Invictus series, it started out being like going back in time, sort of like Lost style, where
Mm-hmm.
we go back to when she's 9, and then when she's 16, and then each character gets her own like backstory built up from like flashbacks, I guess. And for some reason it just felt right for that book, so I've been doing that. I've been phasing that out in the later books because the past has already been covered, and we're in the
Mm-hmm.
present now. Um
Hmm.
so that's been kind of phased out by the end. But yeah, it's definitely something that I enjoy doing because it gives you these like cliffhanger moments where, you know, you can kind of have a cliffhanger and then switch back and forth between timelines, and I kind of like that.
Can toy with your reader, make them mad.
Right? Right.
Mhm, mhm. Interesting, interesting. I feel like that would be a lot to keep track of. Do you have like a running timeline outlined?
Um yeah, for the Invictus series, which I don't do it as much for my other works, but
Mhm,
besides Invictus and Skin Deep, but um for Invictus I definitely kept a um timeline of like what ages they were and what parts and things like that. So
mhm.
it was a lot to keep track of. But For Skin Deep, it wasn't so bad because it was just, two different things. And so I
Hmm.
just had a kind of a regular outline for that. But it was two different outlines, like for the present and the past.
Hmm. Hmm. That makes sense. That makes sense.
Mhm.
Um, Speaking of the past kind of elements of Skin Deep, how I know you said you were researching pirates for fun kind of before you started going down that track.
Mhm.
But when you're writing and when you're dealing with kind of like historical elements and historical fiction, do you find yourself researching as you go along or writing and then kind of incorporating the research? How do you handle that balance between this is what I want to write versus this is what is historically possible at the time?
Right. Yeah, I do research before, if there's anything to research. But at the same time, if I come to a point where there's like I did a lot of research on like for Skin Deep, I did a research on this card game that I had never heard of that people used to play, and
Hmm.
um, learned a lot about that. And it, just to have them playing a card game, and
Hmm.
I did some research on cigarettes and tobacco, and like they wouldn't be just smoking cigarettes or a pipe, but they would be smoking like tobacco rolled up in paper,
Hmm.
if and it was very much like it wasn't accessible. It was very rare for somebody to even have that. So it was kind of like really, like gold. And
Hmm.
so yeah, that kind of research is really important, but at the same time, as far as the emotional parts, I feel like people have always been people. So it kind of, you want them to be historically accurate, but at the same time, what it's like to be a human. And
Hmm.
so that part, the emotional part, isn't as hard, but you do have to incorporate like a woman in the 1700s. She's not allowed to go to the market by herself very often, or things like
Hmm.
that. You got to keep those things in mind. So
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And I love the one thing you said that humans have always kind of been human, and we have all kind of, throughout history, people have had the same emotional struggles for the most part. Having that kind of carryover is really interesting. And I wonder, and this is more of a hypothetical question, but I wonder having those constraints of, oh, women can't really go to the market alone on their own in the past, and how that kind of translates and resonates with readers today, in different ways. That's an interesting thing that I bet would probably come out in the way you've written it. That would be really interesting to see.
Hmm. Yeah. There's, because I'm not, there's a couple characters in Skin Deep. There's a guy in, well, both timelines that are,
Mhm.
they're non-white men who come
Mhm.
from, a different country, and one of them is a pirate, and one of them is just a guy in high school, and it's like the way that you know they interact with the world, which
Mhm.
I don't have experience with that, but I tried to empathize as best I could to give them you know
Mhm.
representation, and to see the difference between how things work with when you're trying to live in a world where you're an outsider, and that goes for like the main character too, but she's an outsider for a different reason, but you know outsiders coming together based on the fact that society doesn't really see them as
Mhm.
um, normal, quote unquote.
Hmm. Hmm. No, absolutely. And I feel like those themes is a weird, probably not the right word to use, but I'm going to use it anyway. The
Mhm.
kind of theme of outsider. Outsidership? Again, not a word. I'm making up words right now, apparently. That's what we're
That's
doing.
okay. Shakespeare did that all the time. It's fine.
Yeah, right. We just hit a certain point, and I'm like, language adjacent. That's what we're going with. Um, but yeah, kind of like this theme of othering, otherness, the outsider nature of kind of
Mhm,
we have society, but society almost requires outsiders to in order to for society to function in a certain way. Um, and I don't think that's a good thing. I'm not saying that as, oh, it needs to do that. I think that's how it functions now, just for
right.
context. Um,
Mhm,
but I do think that is something that kind of carries across so many different time periods, even though it evolves, it changes. It changes in some ways and
mhm,
it changes and it doesn't change in others. Um, yeah, and it sounds like you're kind of dealing with that in a really nuanced and really interesting way, having those parallels throughout the different time periods in Skin Deep. That sounds really fascinating.
mhm. Oh, and that's one of the big, um, to me personally, one of the most important things about being a writer is introducing people to either people they relate to or people they don't relate to at all. And
Mhm.
so when you have somebody who's maybe like, I don't like these kind of people, or I don't like people that dress like this, or whatever, when they read from that person's perspective, they can't help but have some empathy for that person. And so showing people this
Mhm.
person that, is still a person and like you can relate to them on some level. And, I feel like that's one of the most important jobs of what I do,
Mhm.
for me personally. And so that's kind of like a goal I have. And I don't know, I feel like that's happened to me a lot of times when I've watched things. Like one of the things that really impacted my life was Stranger Things, the
Mhm.
character of 11, because I was feeling like an outsider in my life at the
Mhm.
time that I started watching that, and seeing somebody, like her that I related to, because when I was a little girl, I was so quiet all the time, and she barely is verbal, in season one. And so it's like I really
Mhm.
related to her character. And so that helped me a lot to see how powerful she could be, even if she wasn't like everybody else. And
Mhm.
so just metaphorically, it was very like healing to watch that. And so as I've had the impact on myself from great writers. And so I would like to, that's kind of like my goal in writing, is to have that happen to people when they read what I write.
I love the way that you're talking about that and kind of this impact, this emotional impact. Um, I think that one of the things, or how can I phrase this? Um, the way you're talking about getting people to kind of see new perspectives and empathize with different points of view and kind of see themselves represented in perhaps unexpected ways. It reminds me kind of the way I personally think of the writing advice, write what you know, because I know that can be kind of controversial sometimes, that writing advice for very different reasons. Personally, when I think of that, and I guess I probably personally have mixed feelings on it too, but I think that we can write what we know in that human experience. Like we can write what we know about feeling like an outsider and about feeling disconnected and wanting that connection and wanting that power and wanting that strength. And like that's what we know, almost
Right.
regardless of the vehicle of the character in a way.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um. Yeah, I have mixed feelings about that advice too, but I think it depends on who it's coming from or why. Um.
Hmm.
Uh. Because it is a lot more complicated than just I've had a lot of advice um about writing, you know, true stories, people wanting me to write things, that have really happened to me, and things like that. And I'm like, you know, it's really complex. it's really more complicated than that when you're trying to write a story about your feelings and you want to put your feelings into someone else, even if the situation is different. You know, you can use your own experiences for that character. And so that, and you know, that is writing what you know, because you know what it feels like to be heartbroken or suffer loss in your life. And you don't really necessarily need to write about exact moments in your real life to do that.
hmm hmm No, absolutely. Absolutely. And I feel like that also kind of speaks to this idea that one of my teachers sometime in the past mentioned this, and I could not tell you who. I do not remember, which is probably a disservice to them. So I apologize to whoever that was. Um, but one of my teachers in the past always talked about like truth in like literary truth and then actual like fact truth as being two kind of completely different things. And we can write like a factually accurate account of something, or we can write a story that captures kind of the emotional truth and the actual like impact of it in a way that the facts aren't true. The characters are different, the situation's different, but the emotions are true. And it's kind of that literary truth that will oftentimes reach more people and have more of an impact and kind of have, I don't want to say more meaning, but have a little more power to it sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah, definitely. You know, I've heard, well, one of my uncles said, you know, like fiction is telling the truth, it's just not telling the facts. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, that's definitely,
Mhm.
which that's also a little, it's a little awkward when somebody wants you to write your life story or something. Like, for me
Mhm.
personally, I'm like, I'm just not that interesting. Like, I don't know why, you know, I don't think I'm that interesting. And so I would feel weird writing like, you know, like my life stuff.
No, I completely understand. I completely understand. I've written something that was like technically non like literary nonfiction once or creative nonfiction once, and I'm like, I'm never doing this again. Like no one needs to know about my life. Like what? So
Well,
I
and it, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, I have a shorter story that was based on something true, and it's so much harder for me because you don't know what to leave out. You know, you're like,
Mhm.
you know, I need to tell them about this and this and the, you know, it's so much harder because you feel married to reality. And the next time I tried to write something true, I changed it a lot to make it fictional, just to be able to tell the emotional truth of it.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's a really hard thing to do a lot of the times. It's just to know what to let go, when to let go of it, and what works and what doesn't. It's also really weird to try to edit a true story when we get into like the editing process. Because I had to
Right.
do that once, and I'm like, I had because the thing I wrote was for a writing workshop one time, and the guy who was leading the workshop was like, the ending doesn't work. Like, sorry, I can't change what happened.
Right.
But yeah, like it was just, and like I did change it, but not the events, just kind of reframing how they were told, and it worked then. But I'm just like, that was a weird thing to go
Yeah.
through.
Hmm.
But definitely, definitely. Um, Yeah, I want to circle back really, really quickly. You had talked about kind of the impact that Stranger Things had on you individually. I'm curious if you have any other kind of like literary inspirations, any authors that you're really inspired by, or books that you really kind of that make you want to write.
Um, well, I always say my favorite book is, well, you know, I love the Bible, but
hmm hmm
um, my my favorite fiction book is for sure Wicked. I read that when I was in 10th grade. There wasn't a musical yet, but
hmm
um, I've been a fan of that. That's the only book I've read like 10 or 12 times. Um, I love Gregory Maguire. He's written the Wicked series, and then it's expanded into a different series. I've read those. He's written other standalone titles that I've loved.
Hmm.
Um, I've always read Stephen King. I'm really into Charles Dickens.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, Shakespeare and Edgar Allan Poe, and then I read Anne Rice a lot, especially growing up. I
Mhm.
love I love how she describes a place. I feel like I've been to so many different places in the world because of her. Um, yeah, there's a lot. Um, but definitely, I think if I was asked my favorite author, I would probably say Gregor Maguire.
Okay, okay. I love the variety that was in all of the different authors and titles that you were listing. Um,
Right.
I love that. No, I think that's fantastic. I actually have not read Wicked. I need to do that. I have a friend who is absolutely obsessed with the musical, and I
Mhm.
know she has a couple of different copies of the book. So I'm like, I'll have to
Mhm.
borrow one because I know she loves it as well. So now you both are making me curious. I need to read this.
Yeah, it's a lot darker than the movies and
Okay.
musical.
Okay.
Um, there's a lot going on there, but it was it's so rich, I think, with um, philosophical questions about the nature of good and evil and things like that. And I just think it's really special.
Hmm. Hmm. No, I love that. And I love the nuance that kind of books can get. I feel like there are a lot of movies, musicals, TV shows based on books that capture the aesthetic and kind of the overall message of the books, but
Hmm.
nothing will match a book for being able to get into nuance, in my opinion. But I'm a little
Right.
biased.
Right.
Mhm. Mhm. No, absolutely. So, I want to shift gears a teeny tiny bit. I would love to talk about what you're working on now, because I do have insider knowledge that you're working on a series of your own now. If you could tell me a little bit about those.
Oh, the yeah, I started a murder mystery whodunit series
Mhm.
called the Ren Alden Mysteries, and they're short stories, and some of them go a little long, but yeah, those started with a short story I wrote a couple years ago, and then I picked it back up, and I've been having ideas and keeping the same Ren Alden. She's a whodunit writer, and writing like that has helped her, solve a few crimes, based on research she's done for books and things. And she's just you know, she just came alive on the page for me, and I was just like, I can't, I want to keep writing about this person.
Hmm.
And she was just very fun, and uh, in the tradition of I've read all the like Sherlock Holmes short stories from uh, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and
Hmm.
it's just I wanted to write something like that, and so it's a really fun way to just like all these tidbits. I'm like a trivia nerd, and like I pick up all these things, and I'm like, well, this is an interesting trivia. If you have flowers that are this color but they're buried in this kind of soil, they change colors, and like you know all
Hmm.
this kind of weird trivia things, and it's like, how could this relate to a murder or a crime somehow? And it's just really fun to research those types of things. And so it's kind of like, um, I think once I called it like the dessert of writing, where murder mysteries are just so fun to play with, like a puzzle or something.
Hmm.
And so putting all those pieces together is just really fun for me. And so yeah, that's kind of like a side project, but I'm keeping it going. And so yeah, I've been working on that.
Mhm. I love that. I love that. And murder, like you said, murder mysteries, they're just so fun. And it's all little bits and moving pieces, and you get to kind of have
Hmm.
this reveal at the end to your reader. Like, look at all of the things that we've set up, that I've set up for you. Um,
Hmm.
that's
Right.
really, I love that way of thinking of it. Um, are you kind of releasing those as short stories, or are you hoarding them for a collection in the future?
I've been posting them on Vocal as they have a community. They have different sections, categories, and there's one called chapters. And so I've been releasing those on that. There's three out so far, and there's one done, but it's still being edited by
Mhm.
my editor. And so when I get that back, it'll be released. But yeah, I've been releasing those on Vocal, and eventually, I definitely have a collection plan to put into like a physical, like print,
Mhm.
and have a, a a physical copy of like the collection.
Mhm. Mhm. I love that. It's kind of reminding me of like serial publication and how things were kind
Hmm.
of like published in piece by piece, and then eventually you might be able to get the full book. That's so fun, kind of releasing it like that. Uh,
Yeah.
mhm. Love that so much. Um, Now, do you ever kind of bring in those mystery elements to your other work? I mean, from hearing you talk about specifically the Invictus series, that sounds like there are definitely mystery elements in there. But do you find that you enjoy bringing in those little like almost whodunit adjacent kind of elements into your other writing?
Um. Yeah. Actually, I like surprising people, but not in a way that's like the shock matters the most. It doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
I don't try to make the shock matter the most, but um, it yeah. There's always this little hint of like I'm not going to give you everything just yet until a certain point where it's ready. It has to be ready for the story has to be ready for this information and things like that. So there's definitely some secrets and twists in Invictus. And then, kind of in Skin Deep, I think, once you start reading it, you kind of see where it's going, but it's not laid out explicitly. It's, you get there eventually and you're like, I knew that was going to happen. I think most people would see it, but it would still be kind of satisfying.
Hmm.
So yeah, I kind of do bring a little bit of mystery into a lot of things.
I love that. I love that. And I definitely I understand completely what you're saying with Skin Deep and kind of this. We know the direction it's going, but it's still a journey, and the way we get there is where we have kind of like the most fun and exploration and kind of get those little surprises and twists along the way. No,
Right.
absolutely. That's
Hmm.
definitely it's fun as a reader and fun as a writer both.
Right.
Yeah, I have loved getting to talk with you about all of the different projects that you have out, things that you're working on now. Can you share with our listeners kind of where they can find all of these things, where they can follow you, find your writing, so that they can actually look into and enjoy all of the different things we've talked about today?
Yeah, I actually just made a few months ago. I made a website called rainfielder.com, but it's Rain with an E, RAINEFIELDER .com, and that's my website. And there's links to just about everything on there. And then my books are available on Amazon. You can search for Rainfielder, spelled the same way with an E. Um, and I do have a link tree. It's Linktree Rainfielder, um, and an author page on Facebook. All the usual things like that.
Mhm.
But the links to everything are on my website, so I feel like that's the easiest and most organized place to find things.
Perfect, perfect. And I can throw all of those links down into the description of the episode because I have that power to include as many links as I want. Um, so if you're listening, just look in the description. You can click on things, I promise. Um, Oh yeah, awesome, awesome. Now I do have one last question for you today. I ask it to everybody. It's probably the cheesiest question I ever ask. But if you could give one piece of writing advice to other writers or aspiring writers out there, what would you say?
Oh, just what? There's so many. Um, what's the most important thing? Um, I guess just don't let anybody discourage you um, from writing because whether you want to use it, whether you want to, have a career or just do it for yourself or, whatever reason you have, it's rewarding. Just doing it is its own reward. And so there's no reason to give up because even if it doesn't go anywhere, you're still getting something out of it.
I love that. Amazing advice and a fantastic way for us to end this interview. Thank you so, so much for talking with me, for being here tonight. It's been really great to chat with you, to hear about all of your projects and to hear what you're working on. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This is great. I love it.